Hello, welcome back. I'm John, and this is part two of my reading wrap-up. So, the first book I'm going to talk about is Red Dragon by Thomas Harris, and this was a reread for me. I read this about 16 years ago, something like that. Uh, I was probably 14 or 15 when I read this last, and I want to say that I really understood it much better this time, that I probably didn't understand a great deal of it the first time I read it. And I found it pretty disturbing, to be honest with you, this time around because, well, I'll lay the plot down. So we have a man named Will Graham, and it's sort of hard to explain what he is. He's in forensics, but he is also perhaps what we would call an empath. He can he can perceive how other people are reacting in a situation, and he can stand in a room and think things through and feel what the person in that moment was feeling and what they were doing and what they were thinking. So he has this skill that other people in his line of work don't have. And he can go into a crime scene and sort of solve things based on what he knows about the people involved and the murderer. And it takes a huge toll on him because he is living it out as he goes, and both from the murderer's perspective and from the victim's perspective. And he's the one who found Hannibal Lecter. So he had found one serial killer and had to shoot him in a very violent situation, and wound up in a mental institution because it was all he could think about all the time. And then he caught Hannibal Lecter. The sort of things just fell into place, and he went out to make a phone call, and Lecter stabbed him. And so this is the first appearance of Hannibal Lecter, and he's just sort of a background character in this, and not entirely like he would be in Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon or Hannibal. A little bit different in this book, actually. And I think some of the things that Harris uses to describe Hannibal Lecter would fall away in the later books, wouldn't be used at all. So Will Graham has quit. He has quit the FBI, or he sort of hard to explain because he wasn't actually an FBI agent. He was an associate of the FBI. But he has quit all that. He's moved to Florida. He met a woman and he's married her, and that he has a stepson named Willie, which is a little bit confusing at times. And he is working on diesel engines for ships and boats. Or well, just boats, large boats, yachts, that kind of thing. And he's pretty happy. They live in Key West, right on the ocean. It's very nice, and he's all out of that life. But Jack Crawford, who runs the the behavioral whatever it is institute there in the FBI, can't figure out these murders. There are murders where someone is going into these houses of these families at night and killing everyone, and he's smashing all the mirrors in the house and putting glass under their eyelids and some other pretty messed up things. And they don't know who this is or why, because they're taking place in different areas. So one is in Birmingham, one is in Atlanta, I think. And there's no links between these two families that they can think of. The only thing that they realize is that it's happening on a lunar phase, so the full moon and then another full moon. And then, because of that, Jack Crawford comes down to Florida and convinces Will Graham to come do his old job again. Will Graham doesn't want to do it, but Crawford pretty much says, look, without you, in 28 days, there's going to be another family, so please help us. And Graham realizes that he has to. He couldn't live with it if he didn't. And the bad guy in this book is called the Tooth Fairy. And he hates that moniker. He goes by the dragon. He is the red dragon. He is Francis Dollar Hyde. And he had serious birth defects when he was born. His mother abandoned him. He was taken in by, he lived for a while in an orphanage. His grandmother took him in. She was a rich woman who lost everything and had to open her house as a nursing home, and she was really not a good person. She was a very bad person, and she looked just like George Washington, apparently. And she treated everybody really poorly. And she mentally and sort of physically abused Francis Dollar Hyde over the years since he was very, very young. She went crazy. He had to go live with his mother for a while. She would barely acknowledge his existence. Her stepchildren beat him up, and he started to take his anger out on animals. And he grew up. He got into the military. He learned how to work with film, and he is working in a place that processes home video film. So this is the 80s, maybe the late 70s in the book. And we know this as readers. This is how Dollar Hyde is finding his victims, that he is watching all this film of all these families from all over the country. And he goes home with the film and he watches it. And so after suffering all this abuse, he is looking through a book and he sees a William Blake painting. It's a watercolor with the red dragon, and it looks just like that because that is it. There's more in the William Blake, but Dollar Hyde becomes convinced that he is turning into the red dragon. And so he is killing people to become the red dragon, right? And for a really strange reason that I didn't quite catch in the book, Will Graham decides to go to the asylum and talk with Hannibal Lecter. And I didn't really think that, honestly, I really didn't think that that made a lot of sense in the context of this book. And it's just sort of so that Will Graham can be in contact with a psychopath. And I think that was done better in the movies, honestly. So I haven't seen Manhunter, which was the original film based on Red Dragon, but I've seen clips of it over the years. And I think parts of that movie are probably better than the book, to be honest. And then I haven't seen the one called Red Dragon with Ed Norton and Anthony Hopkins in probably 15 years or so. So I really don't remember that. I think maybe the Hannibal Lecter scenes were handled better in the movies, though, because in a way in this book, Lecter is really not important except in one case, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, but not really. The Tooth Fairy is very angry about the way that he's portrayed in the media. So he wants to send a letter to Hannibal Lecter, and Lecter sends Dollar Hyde Will Graham's address. And so they have to kind of go into protective, not protective custody exactly, but they have to kind of go into hiding because until Francis Dollar Hyde is found, Will's entire family is in danger, real danger. And, you know, it's never even really explained why Lecter does this. As in the later books, we don't really get any insight into Hannibal Lecter's mind. At least, you know, I recently reread Silence of the Lambs, and you don't really get a look inside Hannibal Lecter's head, so he remains very much an enigma as to what he's thinking and why he does what he does. And I felt like it was kind of out of character, actually, for him to send Will Graham's address to Francis Dollar Hyde, to be completely honest. And so this is, you know, about Will Graham tracking down Francis Dollar Hyde, and Francis Dollar Hyde trying to track down Will Graham and trying to find more victims. And in the middle of this, Dollar Hyde meets a blind woman, and for the first time in his entire life, he feels she can't see him. she can't see his physical deformities, and she is blind, so they have this, they are different, and they have this in common. And she really, really likes Francis Dollarhide. She doesn't know that he's the Tooth Fairy, and they are actually really good for each other. It's not a major point of the book, really, in the way that it is in Red Dragon, the movie. But Dollarhide can't get the Red Dragon out of his mind, and it sort of takes on a being of its own within him. And so he cannot stop. He can't stop. And she becomes in danger. And yeah, that's Red Dragon. I really enjoyed it. I hope I did it justice. And so the last book I read was Self-Analysis by Karen Horney. And I haven't read, so this is from 1942. This is a 1942 edition. And I have read a couple of her other books, Neurosis and Human Growth, and they won't be listed in this one, I don't think. Our Inner Conflicts is the one I read. I think that I may have read The Neurotic Personality of Our Time, but I don't know. I think I might have read excerpts from that. And New Ways in Psychoanalysis. I haven't read that. But this is Karen Horney's take on whether or not it is useful or valuable or even possible to conduct a psychoanalysis on yourself. So she was sort of from the Freudian school. Freud had only died a few years before this book was published, but she had differences with Freud, and she was not afraid to point them out. In fact, one of these little green slips is, so what she said about Freud was that Freud's goal is thus essentially to be defined in a negative manner, gaining freedom from. Other authors, however, including myself, would formulate the goal of analysis in a positive way, by rendering a person free from inner bondages to make him free for the development of his best potentialities. This may sound like a mere difference in emphasis, but, even if it were nothing but that, the different emphasis suffices to alter the matter of incentive entirely. So, this basically lays out her ideas of self-analysis, what is possible, what is not possible. And she does lean towards the fact that conducting analysis on yourself can be helpful, especially for milder forms of neurosis, which is an outdated term. It's no longer used. I tend to be somebody who is not a big fan of changing certain terms, because terms that work, and altering them is sometimes just an exercise in making things sound better. But anyway, I'm not an expert in this field, clearly, and I wouldn't want to be. I thought that I did when I was younger. So laying out how far a person can get on their own in analysis, and why it is useful to do self-analysis, but also some of the pitfalls in it, and how it really does benefit a person to have a psychoanalyst involved in the process, because they will be able to see things, perhaps your blockages, and see things that you cannot see in your behavior, and perhaps in why you will look at a problem within yourself but deflect away from it, or not deal with it head on, or perhaps only see part of it. So the psychoanalyst's job is to see those things and make the patient aware of them. And like I said, she went in a different direction than Freud. And to be honest, her book, Neurosis and Human Growth, is one of the very few books of all the books I've ever read that I can point to it and say that it changed my life. It was not an immediate overnight change. It took years. But in Neurosis in Human Growth, she talks about something called cognitive dissonance, which is the difference between how you believe you are and how you actually are. So like in your head, you may think you're a good person doing the right thing, and you may think that your behavior is noble or righteous or whatever, but in reality, you are not behaving that way. And that's not just in that situation, but there are different forms of cognitive dissonance. It is believing one way, but being different in reality, or your actions being different in reality than you believe they are. But when I read that book, it was like somebody flipped a switch and I went, oh, that's what's my issue, you know? But it's not an immediate change. It takes sometimes years to change. Anyway, maybe I've gone too far into my own warped mind, but I really did enjoy this. I kind of felt at times that it felt like I kind of felt sometimes like she was leaning too far into the you need a psychoanalyst because I need a job. You know, like we went through all this training and we need a job. And if you are capable of analyzing yourself, you won't need us anymore. Which Carl Jung would sort of lean into that, where you can analyze yourself. You know, you can do dream analysis and you can do active imagination and all that. I've read quite a bit of Jung. I've read quite a bit of Freud. Clearly, I'm out of practice. I don't remember it all very well. It's amazing how quickly that sort of thing left my mind. But I did enjoy this, and I don't think that this book would be particularly interesting to anybody who's never went down that path of reading quite a lot of psychology texts. And I'm not even entirely sure if this was in any way beneficial to me, other than I think it does define well what the purpose of a psychoanalyst is in analysis. Like I said, to point out what you're deflecting away from, to make you look at your problems head on, to see things from a different perspective, to see what you might be leaving out in your own self-analysis. So that is Karen Horney's self-analysis. I probably did a horrendously bad job of explaining it, but I did enjoy it, and it's the first psychology book that I have read in about 2, maybe 3 years. So anyway, those are the 4 books that I have been reading, or that I have read. And the books that I am reading currently, I am almost done with J.B. Priestley's Literature and Western Man. I intended this to be my in-between book, but I've spent quite a lot of time reading it over the past 3 weeks or so, and I've got about 50 pages left in that. This is really good. I'll talk about it in another video. And this is, I showed this in a book haul last year, and I've been on my shelf for almost a year. It is Honorable Men, My Life in the CIA by William Colby. And there is another, he wrote this with Peter Forbath, who was a foreign correspondent, apparently, what it says here on the back. This is really interesting. So William Colby, he started out in the OSS, jumping out of planes into occupied territory in Europe. And gradually after the war, he went back to being a lawyer, trying to be a lawyer, and I think he went back to college, and then he got into a law firm, and then the CIA was gradually coming into being, and he wasn't fully satisfied with being a lawyer, so he got back into intelligence work, and eventually he became the director of the CIA, and he would go up in front of Congress during the church committee. It was called like the Church Committee, but there, after Watergate, there was Seymour Hersh, who was a journalist, came up with some things and blew the lid on some things that were going on in the CIA in Vietnam and before that. And it was William Colby's job to go up in front of Congress and the TV cameras and talk about things that the agency had been up to. And he was fired by Gerald Ford. Colby was a Democrat and Ford was a Republican. And Colby really didn't do what they wanted him to do, so they fired him. And oddly enough, later on in life, he would go missing and never be found. He went out in his, I think, a kayak, and he went missing. And there's a lot of speculation about what happened there. But I will talk about those books when I am finished with them. And I want to thank you for joining me. I know this video is really long, and if you're still here, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.